On the 5th of April 1909, a newspaper in Phoenix, Arizona, ran a story that should have changed the way we understand human history forever. It described a vast underground city carved into the bedrock of the Grand Canyon. Egyptian statues, hieroglyphs on the walls, chambers stacked with unknown metals, mummies wrapped in the dark, hundreds of feet beneath the desert floor. And then, almost as quickly as it had first appeared, it vanished. No follow-up. No excavation records anyone could find. No museum exhibit. Nothing. Today, that article has become the foundation of one of the biggest alternative history theories on the web. People say the crew who found it was reassigned within days. They say the site was sealed. And they say it connects to a lost worldwide civilization the history books deliberately erased. However, when you actually go looking for the truth behind that 1909 story, I have to pause here for a second. Because what I just described, that is one case from a much larger pattern. There are 35 documented cases in a document I put together. Different cities, different decades, different types of evidence. Every single one follows the same sequence: discovered, documented, acquired, disappeared. I could not fit all of it into a video. It's in the pinned comment below. Find it before we continue. What you find is stranger than any cover-up, because the real mystery isn't what they buried underground. It's how a story with almost no evidence behind it managed to survive for over 100 years, and why so many people desperately want it to be real. This is the story of what the Grand Canyon legend actually is, where it came from, and what it tells us about the way we build history out of the things we can't explain. Let's go back to the beginning. The newspaper was called the Arizona Gazette. In 1909, it was a small regional paper competing for readers in a state that wasn't even a state yet. Arizona wouldn't join the Union until 1912. This was frontier territory. Boomtowns, mining claims, land speculation, and a public hungry for wonder. Newspapers of that era didn't operate the way we imagine journalism today. Sensational stories weren't the exception. They were the business model. If a headline could sell papers, it ran, and questions about whether it was actually true often came later, if they came at all. The article carried a headline about explorations in the Grand Canyon and mysteries of an immense, rich cavern being brought to light. It claimed that under the direction of a professor from the Smithsonian Institution, an explorer had discovered an enormous system of tunnels and chambers deep inside the canyon walls. The main figure named was an adventurer the paper called G.E. Kincaid. According to the article, Kincaid had been traveling down the Colorado River when he spotted something unusual high up in the rock face. Steps, carved, deliberate steps, cut into stone hundreds of feet above the water. What he supposedly found inside reads like the plot of a Lost World adventure novel. A main passageway running back into the mountain for nearly a mile. Side chambers branching off in every direction, large enough to hold thousands of people. A great central room with passages radiating out like the spokes of a wheel. Tablets covered in unknown writing. Statues of a figure seated cross-legged, holding a lotus flower, resembling depictions from ancient Asia and Egypt. Copper weapons hardened by some forgotten process, granaries still holding the residue of ancient seeds. And in one crypt, tier upon tier of mummies, the larger ones on top, the smaller ones beneath, all wrapped and preserved in the dry canyon air. It was an incredible story, genuinely incredible. And that word matters, because it works in both directions. It's the kind of story that inspires wonder. It's also, quite literally, not credible. But before we tear it apart, let's give it its moment. Because to understand why this legend refuses to die, you have to understand why it was so appealing in the first place. Think about the year, 1909. The Western world was in the grip of Egypt mania. The great archaeological expeditions along the Nile were front-page news. Museums were filling with sarcophagi and golden masks. Ordinary people were fascinated by the idea of lost civilizations sleeping under the sand, waiting to be uncovered. The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb was still over a decade away, but the appetite for that kind of revelation was already enormous. Now imagine you're a reader in Arizona, and someone tells you that instead of traveling across the world to Egypt, there might be an Egyptian city hidden right here, in the greatest natural wonder of your own country. That's not just a news story. That's a fantasy of importance. It says this land, this new and supposedly young country, is secretly ancient, secretly significant, part of some grand hidden story that stretches back thousands of years. That emotional pull is the engine of the entire legend. Keep it in mind, because it's going to explain everything that happens next. And it's worth pausing on the Grand Canyon itself, because the location was not chosen by accident. Of all the places on Earth to set a story like this, the canyon might be the single most effective. Think about what it does to a person standing on the rim for the first time. It overwhelms. It's a mile deep, hundreds of miles long, layered in bands of red and gold rock that record hundreds of millions of years of the planet's history. It is almost impossible to look at it and not feel small, and not feel that you are in the presence of something ancient beyond comprehension. That feeling of deep, unknowable age is precisely the emotional soil in which a story about a hidden ancient civilization takes root. The canyon also does something practical for the legend. It hides things. Its scale is so vast, its side canyons so numerous and remote, its walls so sheer and inaccessible, that a person can genuinely believe almost anything might be tucked away in some corner no one has reached. Most of us will only ever see the handful of famous overlooks. The idea that something could be concealed in the immensity beyond feels, standing there, entirely plausible. The place itself seems to whisper that it's keeping secrets. A story claiming to reveal one is pushing on a door the landscape has already opened in the visitor's imagination. There's a deeper layer to this too. For a young nation still assembling its own mythology, the Grand Canyon was becoming a kind of natural cathedral, a symbol of the country's grandeur and permanence. To place a lost civilization inside it is to graft an ancient human past onto a land that, in the standard story, had no towering old-world empires of its own. It answers a quiet insecurity. It says this place, too, has depth, has age, has a hidden legacy to rival the pyramids. That's a seductive thing to offer, and the canyon is the perfect stage on which to offer it. So what actually happened after the article ran? Here's where the mystery deepens, but not in the way the theories claim. The answer is almost nothing happened, and that nothing is the most important clue of all. There was no wave of follow-up reporting, no competing newspaper rushed to confirm or debunk the find, no scientific expedition was mounted. The Arizona Gazette itself, as far as anyone has been able to document, never seriously returned to the story. It simply faded. A sensational headline one week, and then the ordinary churn of frontier news carried on as if nothing had been said at all. Now, the alternative history version of events fills that silence with menace. The silence, they say, is the proof. The crew was reassigned. The site was sealed by the government. The Smithsonian, that great warehouse of official knowledge, made the whole thing disappear because it threatened the accepted timeline of human history. The absence of evidence becomes, in their telling, the strongest evidence of all. But there's a much simpler explanation for the silence, and it's one that anyone who has ever worked in media will recognize instantly. The story faded because there was nothing underneath it to sustain it, no verifiable people, no physical location anyone could visit, no artifacts anyone could hold. When a sensational claim has nothing solid beneath it, it doesn't get covered up. It just evaporates. The world moves on to the next headline. Let's talk about the people in the story, because this is where it really starts to fall apart. The article names a Smithsonian professor as the man directing the discovery. Researchers have gone looking for that name in the Smithsonian's records. It isn't there. The institution has stated, more than once, that it has no record of the individuals named in the article, no record of the expedition, and no Egyptian discovery anywhere in the Grand Canyon. Now, the theorists will immediately say, well, of course they'd deny it. That's what a cover-up looks like. And it's true that an institution denying something isn't automatically proof it didn't happen. But consider the other named figure, the explorer himself, the man supposedly at the center of the greatest archaeological find in North American history. Outside of that one newspaper article, he barely exists. No verifiable biography, no body of other work, no photographs of him at the site, no letters, no journals, no independent record of a man who, if the story were true, would have been one of the most famous explorers who ever lived. A discovery like that doesn't produce one anonymous newspaper column. It produces books, careers, museum wings, decades of argument. Here, there is a single article and then silence. And then there's the geography. The article describes the entrance to this underground city as being set into the canyon wall along a specific stretch of the Colorado River. The Grand Canyon is one of the most thoroughly explored, surveyed, mapped, hiked, rafted, and photographed places on the planet. In the century since 1909, countless geologists, park rangers, river guides, and tourists have covered nearly every accessible inch of it. Nobody has found a mile-long tunnel system lined with Egyptian statues, not because they've been forbidden from looking, but because it isn't there. So, if the discovery almost certainly never happened, the obvious question is, why would a newspaper print it in the first place? And this is where the honest history becomes genuinely fascinating, because we don't have to guess about the culture that produced this story. We know it well. The early 1900s were the golden age of the newspaper hoax. This was an era of fierce competition between papers, of circulation wars, of editors who understood that a spectacular story sold copies whether or not it was true. There's a long and well-documented tradition of American newspapers simply inventing marvels. Decades earlier, a New York paper had famously published an entire series claiming that astronomers had discovered civilizations living on the moon, complete with winged humanoids and lush lunar forests. It was fabricated from start to finish, and people believed it. That wasn't an outlier. That was the water these publications swam in. Against that backdrop, an anonymous article about a hidden Egyptian city in the Grand Canyon isn't a suppressed government secret. It's a textbook example of exactly the kind of tall tale that frontier newspapers ran to move copies. The wonder was the product. The reader's astonishment was the whole point. And it helps to understand just how loose the relationship between newspapers and the truth actually was in this period. There was no formal ethics code holding editors to account. There were no fact-checking departments. A reporter, or an editor with a slow news day and blank column inches to fill, could conjure a story out of thin air, and there was very little to stop him. Papers openly borrowed and embellished each other's material. A tall tale printed in one town would be reprinted 3 towns over, the details growing more vivid with each retelling. Some writers built entire reputations on their ability to spin a convincing yarn, and readers, to a degree we've largely forgotten, often understood the game. They read these marvels the way we might read a supermarket tabloid today, with a wink, enjoying the spectacle without staking their worldview on it. The Arizona Gazette story fits this mold in every particular. Notice its features. It's exotic, invoking Egypt and the Orient, the most fashionable fascinations of the day. It's local, planting that exotic wonder in the reader's own backyard, which makes it feel personally thrilling. It's grand in scale, a mile of tunnels, thousands of chambers, a discovery to rival anything in the old world. And it's conveniently unverifiable, set deep in a remote canyon, attributed to men the average reader could never track down. Every one of those features is exactly what you'd design into a story if your goal was to dazzle readers and sell papers, and exactly what you would not expect from a sober report of a genuine archaeological find. Real discoveries are announced cautiously, hedged with qualifications, backed by named institutions eager to claim credit. Invented ones arrive fully formed and spectacular, with no one to answer follow-up questions. But here's what makes the Grand Canyon story different from the moon hoax, and this is the crucial turn. The moon hoax was eventually and thoroughly exposed, and it became a historical footnote, a curiosity about how gullible the public once was. The Grand Canyon story did something else. It went to sleep, and nearly a century later it woke up. To understand how a dead newspaper article from 1909 became a cornerstone of modern alternative history, we have to jump forward in time to the age of the Internet. For most of the 20th century, the Grand Canyon story was essentially forgotten. Before I go further, that document in the pinned comment. If you have not found it yet, go there now, because everything I cover in these videos is one piece of a pattern that only becomes visible when you see all 35 cases together. The document shows you the full pattern. What I can show you here is the surface. What is down there is everything underneath it. Pinned comment, now, then come back. It survived only in the margins, kept alive by a small number of writers interested in mysteries, anomalies, and suppressed knowledge. It was the kind of thing that showed up in paperback books with titles about unexplained phenomena, passed hand to hand among enthusiasts. It had no mainstream life at all. Then the internet arrived, and everything changed. The web did something to old stories that nothing before it could do. It gave them immortality and infinite reach at the same time. Suddenly a scanned image of that 1,909 article could be posted, shared, and reposted endlessly. And crucially, when it was shared, it was almost always stripped of its context. People didn't see a sensational column from a frontier paper competing for readers in territorial Arizona. They saw an old, authoritative-looking newspaper page, and old newspapers carry an aura of truth. If it was printed back then, people reasoned, and printed so confidently, there must be something to it. This is one of the most important dynamics in all of alternative history, so it's worth saying plainly, age gets mistaken for authority. A claim doesn't become more true because it's old. But it often becomes more believable, because we instinctively trust that people in the past wouldn't have printed something so detailed if it were pure invention. That instinct is exactly wrong for this period, and it's the instinct the legend feeds on. There was another force at work too, one specific to how the modern internet is built. The platforms that carried this story forward are engineered to reward engagement above accuracy. A calm, careful explanation that a century-old article was probably a hoax gets very little traction. A bold, dramatic claim that the government buried an ancient Egyptian city and erased the crew who found it gets shared, argued over, and pushed to more people. The systems that decide what we see don't measure whether a thing is true, they measure whether it holds attention. And a hidden city cover-up holds attention far better than a debunking ever will. So the more sensational version of the story was mechanically favoured, lifted and amplified, not because anyone decided it was correct, but because it performed. The truth, in that environment, is running a race it was never designed to win. Once the article was loose on the internet, it found a home in a much larger and rapidly growing world of suppressed history thinking. And to understand the shape that world took, we have to talk about the theory that has swallowed this story more completely than any other. We have to talk about Tartaria. If you've spent any time in the corners of the internet where alternative history lives, you've encountered it. Tartaria is the name of a sprawling modern theory that proposes there was once a great, advanced, worldwide civilization, one whose true history has been deliberately erased from our records. The name itself is borrowed from something real. On old European maps, a huge stretch of Central and Northern Asia was labelled Tartary or Tartaria. It was a vague geographic term, a catch-all that mapmakers used for the vast, poorly understood lands beyond the edges of what they knew. The modern theory takes that old label and transforms it into something else entirely. In this telling, Tartaria wasn't just a fuzzy region on a map. It was a lost empire of astonishing sophistication, with technology and architecture beyond what the official timeline allows. Believers point to grand old buildings, World's Fair pavilions, ornate train stations, and majestic exhibition halls, and they argue these structures are too beautiful, too advanced, too perfect to have been built by the societies credited with them. They must be remnants, the theory says, of that older, greater civilization. Everything else, the story goes, is a fabricated timeline stitched together to hide the truth. Now, whatever you make of that idea, and there are serious and thorough responses to every one of its claims, you can immediately see why the 1,909 Grand Canyon story fits it so perfectly. A hidden ancient city of unknown origin, filled with the works of a lost people, quietly erased by an official institution. It's the same shape, it's the same emotional promise. The idea that the world is secretly older, grander, and more mysterious than we've been told, and that powerful forces are keeping that grandeur from us. So the article got pulled into the gravity of the larger theory. It stopped being a standalone curiosity and became a piece of evidence in a much bigger case. And once a story becomes evidence for something people already want to believe, it becomes almost impossible to kill. Every debunking is reinterpreted as part of the cover-up. Every absence of proof becomes proof of suppression. The theory becomes a sealed system where nothing can count against it. Let's sit with that for a second, because it's the real heart of this whole subject. It's more interesting than any tunnel full of statues. Why do these theories work so well on us? Why does a hidden city in the Grand Canyon feel so satisfying even to people who half suspect it isn't true? Part of the answer is that suppressed history theories offer something ordinary history struggles to provide. They offer meaning. The mainstream account of the past is complicated, uneven, and often boring. It's full of gaps and uncertainties and unglamorous explanations. A theory like Tartaria replaces all of that with a single, dramatic, unifying story. There was a golden age. It was stolen from you. And if you can just see through the lie, you'll understand the true shape of the world. That's a seductive offer. It turns the believer into a kind of hero, someone with secret knowledge, someone who sees what the sleeping masses can't. It transforms a passive relationship with history into an active quest, and it does something even deeper. It re-enchants the world. It says the marvelous is real, the extraordinary is out there, and the reason your life feels ordinary is that the wonder has been hidden from you. That's not a small thing to offer someone. That's an enormous emotional gift, and it explains why facts alone so rarely dislodge these beliefs. You're not just arguing about a newspaper, you're arguing about whether the world is magical or mundane. There's also a genuine seed of legitimate suspicion buried in all of this, and it would be dishonest not to acknowledge it. Institutions have hidden things. Official histories have been wrong, sometimes badly and shamefully wrong. Powerful organizations have suppressed inconvenient truths. That's real, and it's part of why these theories find such fertile ground. They take a reasonable instinct that authority should be questioned, and they stretch it into a worldview where authority is lying about everything, all the time, in coordinated fashion. The instinct is healthy. The destination is not. The trick is learning to tell the difference between a question worth asking and a story engineered to be unfalsifiable. And that brings us back to the specific claims wrapped around the 1909 article, the ones baked into the way this story usually gets told. The crew was reassigned the same week. The site was sealed. Let's look at those directly, because they reveal how the legend has grown in the telling. Here's the thing about those details. They aren't in the original article. The 1909 story is a tale of discovery, told with breathless excitement, presenting the find as a triumph to be celebrated and studied. There's no crew being reassigned in it. There's no government sealing anything. There's no suppression at all. The original is trying to sell you wonder, not conspiracy. The cover-up elements were added later. They accumulated over decades as the story passed through different hands, each teller adding a layer that made it fit the suppression narrative a little better. This is how legends actually work. They aren't static. They grow. They adapt to the anxieties and appetites of each new audience. In an age suspicious of government and institutions, the story quietly evolved to include government suppression because that's the version that resonates now. The 1909 readers wanted a marvel. The modern audience wants a cover-up. So the legend gave each of them what they were looking for. That evolution is the actual documentary here. Not a buried city, but a living story, mutating across a century to survive in changing conditions. In a strange way, the Grand Canyon legend is a perfect fossil record, not of an ancient civilization, but of how human beings manufacture and maintain belief. Let's steelman the other side properly, though, because a fair account demands it. What's the strongest case a believer could make? They would say this: you're relying on the absence of records, but absence of records is exactly what you'd expect from a genuine cover-up. You're trusting the Smithsonian's denial, but the Smithsonian is precisely the institution accused of doing the hiding. You're pointing out that the explorer has no other documentation, but a man erased from history wouldn't, would he? You dismiss the story because it fits a pattern of hoaxes, but couldn't a real discovery be buried by making it look like a hoax? That's the most effective disguise of all. Those are not stupid arguments. They have an internal logic. And if you already believe the conclusion, they feel airtight. But notice what they all have in common. Every one of them is constructed so that no evidence could ever disprove it. If records exist, that's proof. If records are missing, that's proof of suppression. If an institution stays silent, that's a cover-up. If it denies the claim, that's a cover-up too. When a theory is built so that every conceivable outcome confirms it, it has stopped being a claim about the world and become a closed loop of belief. It can no longer be tested, which means it can no longer teach you anything new. And a story that can never be wrong is not the same as a story that is right. The honest position, the genuinely open-minded position, is harder and less thrilling. It's this. Based on everything we can actually verify, the 1909 Grand Canyon article was almost certainly a sensational newspaper story of a kind that was common in its era, describing a discovery that there is no good reason to believe ever occurred. It named people who cannot be found at a location that has never yielded what it described, reported by a single source that never meaningfully followed up. That's not a cover-up. That's what an invented story looks like from 100 years away. But, and this matters, that conclusion is held with humility, not arrogance. If real, verifiable evidence ever emerged, actual artifacts, actual documentation, an actual site, the honest mind would follow it. That willingness to be persuaded by evidence and the refusal to be persuaded without it is the entire difference between curiosity and belief. One follows the evidence wherever it goes. The other decides the destination first and drags the evidence along behind it. So what did they really hit, digging into the Grand Canyon in 1909? The answer, as best as anyone can tell, is nothing. No crew struck a hidden Egyptian city. No tunnel of mummies was sealed away. The only thing that was really unearthed in 1909 was a story, printed on cheap paper, designed to sell newspapers in a dusty frontier territory. But that story turned out to be more durable than any tunnel could ever have been. It outlived its authors. It outlived the newspaper. It outlived the entire world that produced it. And it's still travelling today, carried on screens its creators could never have imagined, believed by people who will never know the names of the men who first told it. There's something almost poetic in that. The legend claims to be about a lost civilization beneath the earth, but the real lost civilization is the one that made it. The vanished world of frontier journalism, of circulation wars and invented marvels, of a young country hungry to believe it was secretly ancient. That world is gone, and the story it left behind keeps digging its way back to the surface, again and again, whenever someone posts that old article and asks, what if this were true? And maybe that question is the real artifact, not the statues, not the tunnels, the question itself. That restless human need to believe the world is deeper and stranger than we've been allowed to know. That need is real. It's ancient. It's in all of us. The Grand Canyon story is just one of the countless vessels we've built to carry it. The theories will tell you the truth is buried in the canyon, sealed behind official lies. But the more interesting truth was never underground at all. It's in the way a single, unverified article can grow, over 100 years, into an entire worldview. It's in what that growth reveals about us, about how we decide what's real, about why we so often prefer a beautiful mystery to an ordinary fact. The 1909 story survived, not because it was true, but because it was satisfying. And in the economy of belief, satisfaction has always been the more valuable currency. So the next time you see that old newspaper page, the headline about the immense rich cavern and the hidden city beneath the canyon, look at it a little differently. Don't ask whether the city is real. Ask why you want it to be. Ask what it would give you if it were. Because the honest answer to that question tells you far more about the world and about yourself than any tunnel full of ancient statues ever could. The dig site that actually matters isn't in Arizona. It's in the space between what we can prove and what we long to believe. And that's a place worth exploring carefully. With your eyes open, keep the wonder. It's one of the best things about being human, and the same curiosity that makes us vulnerable to a beautiful lie is also the thing that drives us to uncover real truths, stranger and more magnificent than anything a frontier newspaper could invent. Just make sure the wonder serves you, and not the other way around. Follow the questions, demand the evidence, and let the mystery be exactly as deep as the facts allow, no deeper and no less.